the average population of youth across the world, especially the Western world, they tend to lose their flexibility as they get into adolescence. Like 13 and 14-year-old kids are losing their flexibility. So although they can adapt faster, if they don't do their flexibility, they will lose their flexibility. So it's still important, even for a youth, an adolescent, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, they need to keep on working on their flexibility to maintain that, so that as they get older, it's not a major problem.
Welcome to FSI Talks, where football experts from around the world share practical and updated knowledge with the FSI community.
Welcome to FSI Talk, where the best experts in the world come together to talk about football. My name is Bernardo Requena. I'm FSI co-founder, and I will be the host of this talk. Today, we are going to talk about flexibility, mobility, and the stretching framework. And to me, I have the honor to be with the best expert, in my opinion, around the world, working and researching about this topic, our FSI professor, Dr. David Behm. David, let me introduce you. He's a professor of the School of Human Kinetics and Recreation at Memorial University of Newfoundland in exercise physiology, with a focus on many research topics, but of course in flexibility and stretching. His research explores the impacts of various stretching techniques, such as static, dynamic, PNF, on athletic performance and injury prevention. And Dr. Behm's findings are highly relevant for football players, offering evidence-based strategies to enhance performance, improve flexibility, and reduce injury risk. So, David, welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Gracias.
So, David, before I start to go in the topic, I would like that you could show our attendees a little review about your professional and academic achievements.
All right. Well, you mentioned that I have over 400 publications, and that would be nice, and would be nicer if people read them. So I think another statistic that's even more important than the number of publications is the number of citations that you have. So I have close to 40,000 citations of my work. So thankfully, that means somebody is actually reading my work. So that's nice news. I've received a number of awards from the university for doing research, and a number of international awards as well. The Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology has given me an honor award for my research. The International Strength and Conditioning Society has done the same thing. The National Strength and Conditioning Association named me as a sports scientist of the year back, I think it was in 2014. The Canadian Kinesiology Association has me as an honor award. So, fellow of the European College of Sports Sciences. So yeah, I've been lucky enough to stay busy for the last 30 years or so.
It's fantastic. So let's go deep in our topic. And the first question I would like to plant to you is like, David, let's clarification the concepts, because me, in my case, as a coach, we interchangeable the term mobility with flexibility, for example. So I would like to listen from you. What's your opinion about these concepts? Which are the key differences, if there are, and how they should be used?
Sure. So obviously, mobility and flexibility are very similar terms, but there are key aspects. Normally, when you think about flexibility, you're thinking about passive tests. So what's the ability of a muscle and the surrounding tissue to elongate or extend? And normally we test that passively. So somebody else will move your leg or move your arm. So moving through a full range of motion. Whereas mobility is more of an active type of definition. So it's the ability to move freely through a range of motion. Perhaps not a full range of motion, you may not need. So again, if we're on the football field and we're jogging from one position to another, we don't need to do the splits, all right? However, when we sprint, we need a more expansive range of motion. So the mobility is our ability to move through the range of motion that we need to accomplish our goals, whereas flexibility would be our ability to move through the greatest range of motion that we can. And typically that's tested by passive tests.
Okay. So let's talk about techniques of training, flexibility, mobility. So could you overview which we find actually?
Okay. So again, start off with flexibility. Everybody would think of static stretching as a way to improve your range of motion with or flexibility. There's dynamic stretching, which would be controlled movement through a full range of motion. So like kicking your leg back and forth or from side to side, or doing big arm circles with your shoulders. That would all be dynamic range of motion. Then you have ballistic stretching, which is a type of dynamic stretching, but in that case, you're going at a much faster speed. So you would never do ballistic stretching as, for instance, the first thing you do. You'd have to be well warmed up in order to do ballistic stretching. Then we have the term PNF, or proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And in that case, we use a combination of an active contraction. Let's say we're going to stretch the hamstrings. So you'd lie on your back and you would actively pull your leg up with your quadriceps. And then your partner, or you could use a band, would then provide resistance. So you would do a static stretch at your maximum range of motion. Then after that static stretch, you would then contract the hamstrings against the person or the band. So you've got an antagonist contraction, you've got an agonist contraction, agonist being the muscle that you're actually stretching, and you're stretching the muscle that you want to stretch. So it's got three major components to it. And so those would be the four static, PNF, dynamic, and ballistic stretching methods for increasing flexibility. Now, mobility, like I said before, you don't have to go through a full range of motion. So just watch almost any professional football team, and part of their warm-up is that they'll be running through the cones. They'll be doing knee lifts, higher knee lifts, or kickbacks, where they kick their heel back towards their butts. Or they'll be doing shuffle movements. So these are all mobility movements. And what's best, for instance, we all know about the FIFA program, I think, for the most part. And the FIFA program provides warm-ups, especially for young football players, that combine the flexibility, so static and dynamic stretching, and the mobility. So sprinting, agility, shuffles, and cones, etc. So both those combined give you the best performance.
Okay, that's really clear. I think for all folks it's clear the concept. So we can start from this classification. That's why I wanted, David, that you could clarify the concepts about flexibility, mobility, and the different techniques that we are going to talk now more in the next question. So, okay, but in football in general, what will be the main benefits that you could attribute to flexibility training in general in football?
All right. So obviously, if you have a restricted range of motion, then you have more resistance to your motion. So when we want to, for instance, if we want to sprint has two components, two major components: your stride frequency, how fast your legs move, and your stride length. If you have a restricted range of motion, your stride length will be limited. So flexibility training will help to enhance that stride length. Now, stride frequency is more important than stride length for improving your speed, but still, it is a component that you want. And in the long term, if you have less resistance to the movement, then there's less effort on your part. So it would probably contribute to decreased fatigue, better endurance. The second thing is that we have evidence that, although it was controversial 20 years ago, that static stretching will decrease the incidence of musculotendinous injuries. Now, in the past, they would have said, no, stretching does not decrease, and the term they used was all-cause injuries. So all-cause injuries, like it says, everything. So you're running down the football field and you put your foot in a hole and you break your ankle. Well, would stretching have stopped you from breaking your ankle? Well, of course not. It can't do that. Or when you fell down, you hit your head on a rock, all
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And you got a concussion. Well, stretching can't stop you from having a concussion.
Yeah.
But according to the most recent literature in the last 20 years, it can have an effect on decreasing muscle and tendon injuries, especially when it comes to explosive contractions, so sprints or changes of direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we focus now on injury prevention inside football, inside the football context, how flexibility training could be implemented to reach the main preventive adaptations?
Well, there's two periods that you might think of for stretching. So, of course, we all think of stretching before we go and play football as part of our warm-up. And the static stretching still should be a part of that warm-up. But the important thing is that it has to be a short duration. Long duration static stretching, like more than 60 seconds per muscle group, can lead to performance impairments. So reduce strength, reduce power, reduce speed. So we want to put that into the warm-up, but like I say, less than 60 seconds per muscle group, and then add dynamic stretching and then add mobility to that as well. So then you'll have a good warm-up. But in order to really get the benefits of flexibility, we need to stretch for a longer period of time. So we might want to stretch each muscle group anywhere between 60 seconds to 120 seconds.
Okay.
Not good for the warm-up, but good for preventing injuries. So therefore, we want to do that outside of the football arena. So we have a separate, just like, for instance, you would never start doing squats and bench press before you jumped on the football field. That would be silly. So you don't want to do extensive stretching before you go on the football field. You want to do a little bit. And so the same thing, if you want to get stronger, you're going to do resistance training at another session. You're going to do extensive stretching at another session in order to try and hopefully prevent some of those injuries.
This is very interesting what you're explaining here. I think for all of our folks are really, really useful for daily work. In this way, I want to present you, for example, what we see in real life in our daily work with football players is that many injuries are related with range of motion limitations. For example, tendinopathies in patellar tendon. Normally, players with a chronic tendinopathy they present a hip anterior chain limited in range of motion. So in cases in which is identified a limited range of motion and you have an injury, chronic injury, that is this limitation in the range of motion is related with this pathology, with this injury. I would like to listen about you. What type of protocols do you think it will be more suitable to apply in these cases in which you have a range of motion that is limited and you want to improve the flexibility of this movement? How could we implement?
Okay, so let's go through different stages. So you did mention, well, what if the person is injured?
Yeah.
Well, you can't stretch an injured muscle because you'll probably injure it to a greater degree. What we've shown in our research is that there are global effects of stretching. So we've shown that if you stretch your right hamstrings, your left hamstrings get more flexible. We've shown that if you stretch your shoulders, then your hamstrings get more flexible.
Yeah.
So when you're injured and you cannot stretch the injured hamstring or the injured quadriceps or your injured shoulder, keep on stretching other parts of your body, because that will help to maintain some of that mobility. And in fact, we've shown in some other research by a colleague of mine, Konstantin Warnecke from Austria, that stretching can actually increase muscle strength and hypertrophy. So again, you've got an injured hamstring. Well, you can't go and do resistance training on that hamstring until you're recovered. But you can do extensive stretching. So we've seen, like, if we do even 10 minutes of constant stretching, but we've done up to an hour of constant stretching, 5 to 6 days a week, that the muscle gets stronger and bigger. So when we're injured, we should be doing stretching, first of all, of the non-injured leg. And then when the muscle that was injured is recovering and we can put some tension on it, we should start stretching that muscle to, again, keep the range of motion and try and decrease any atrophy with the injury. So from there, when we go into, now we've got a person that's somewhat recovered, or they're constantly or chronically limited in the range of motion, we need a toolbox. Stretching is great, but it's just one tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
So we all know about some of the new techniques. I mentioned there's 4 different types of stretching, so we want to use all 4. We also want to use foam rolling. Foam rolling can help people. We also want to use vibration guns, because vibration guns, there's been a number of studies looking at gymnasts.
Yeah.
And the gymnasts do static stretching with vibration guns and find a greater increase in range of motion. So just like when we're resistance training, if all you do is bench press every second day, you're going to plateau in your strength. You need to provide your muscles with a greater variety of stressors. So you want to do bench press and dumbbell chest flies and pullovers and all sorts of different things. The same thing with your flexibility. If all you do is static stretching, you're going to plateau. So static stretching, ballistic stretching, dynamic stretching, PNS stretching, foam rolling, instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization, flossing, and vibration guns. Throw them all in there, and your muscle will start to adapt in different ways because it's being stressed different ways.
Yeah, I had your advance is one of the questions I had in mind is about another techniques or tools to improve flexibility and mobility. So in this way, I want to go a little deep in this. Okay, what about the last research about foam rolling, David? If you could advance about foam rolling, ball rolling, or the next steps like last technology like vibration, foam rolling that with vibration, or the gangs. Actually,
Sure.
we see more and more.
So the first question is, does foam rolling work? Well, that's a great question, and we've looked at that in a couple of meta-analyses that I've published, and also with my colleague Andreas Conrad from Austria. And what we found in our meta-analyses that foam rolling provides you with a similar increase in range of motion in a single session. So an acute bout of foam rolling will give you somewhat the same increase in range of motion as doing static stretching for the same duration.
Okay.
If you're going to do foam rolling training, so you're going to chronically foam roll, then static stretching is more effective in the first 4 weeks. After 4 weeks of foam rolling starts to catch up, and it provides you with similar benefits after a month or more of foam rolling. But over the shorter term, 3 or 4 weeks, static stretching is more effective. So the next question is, okay, so it works. So how does it work? Well, 10 years ago, they always used this term self-myofascial release technique. And a lot of physiotherapists thought that by rolling the muscle, either with a rotor massage with your hands or with your body, that it would reduce these adhesions in your myofascia. But according to a number of researchers, for instance, Schleip from Germany, you need what he calls super threshold forces. So if you go to a massage therapist, not your girlfriend or your boyfriend who does it like nice and soft. If you go to a massage therapist, what are they going to do? They're going to take their knuckle and they're going to put almost their full body weight on their knuckle and start driving into that fascia and the muscle to try and remove the adhesions. Or they're going to take their elbow and again do the same thing and push it into those adhesions. Now, we're not even sure if that works, but there's definitely higher pressures and more chance that will work rather than just rolling on a polyurethane foam roller. So it's not self-myofascial release. What it can do, of course, is that when you put a stressor on a tissue, you get what's called a thixotropic effect. that means that the viscosity, the fluid inside the tissue becomes less viscous.
Yeah.
So it's not as thick. So if you roll or you vibrate or you stretch or you massage, then the fluid becomes less viscous and it's easier to move through range of motion. Another very important thing that works for everything is if you put yourself under some discomfort or pain, then your body reacts to that pain and tries to reduce the pain. So the body, for example, would release endorphins from your brainstem, from the reticular formation, and endorphins and enkephalins are like morphine. So it's like taking a drug to reduce pain throughout your body. So what stops you from your range of motion? You try and reach forward. Oh, that hurts. I'm going to stop there. Well, if you reduce the pain, you can go farther.
Yeah.
So foam rolling can induce endorphins. It can induce thixotropic effects. But we did a really interesting study, and it goes back to mobility again. Mobility just by itself, you don't even have to go through a full range of motion. You get an increased range of motion just by moving. So in this study, we had people foam roll their hamstrings. Then what we did was we had them sit on this roller that moved back and forth on the floor with a pad on it.
Yeah.
So the muscle wasn't being rolled, but your body was moving back and forth. So as you know from rolling, typically you'd have your hands down and you move your body back and forth over the roller. So now we're moving back and forth without a roller. And you can probably guess what I'm going to say. The increase in range of motion was similar whether you used the foam roller or whether you had the sham rolling. So you didn't even use a foam roller. So you say, well, how can that work? Well, again, by just moving, mobility, you're warming up your body. And if the core temperature goes up, then you get those thixotropic effects. You get a decrease in viscosity, get an increase in range of motion.
That's fantastic. So to close this part, David, the combination, like you said, at the end, coaches, even players individually, they have a toolbox with the different possibilities. And if we think in a normal context of training for player, what about planification? What about periodization? It will be good to plan. For example, if you want to focus some areas, some days, or what are your recommendations about it?
Yes, obviously we always need to plan our training, but in terms of periodization, typically we do periodization with resistance training or high intensity anaerobic training like sprinting, etc., because we don't want to overtrain. So what happens when you do resistance training? Well, you end up with signals to the system to increase protein synthesis. And what typically happens is that there's little micro injuries in the muscle that need to be repaired, and the system increases protein synthesis to repair. And then we use the term supercompensate or overcompensate. So the body just doesn't repair those micro tears, it makes the system and the muscles bigger and stronger. Well, when you're stretching, you're typically not getting those micro tears. So there's really, unless we are, well, no, not even then. I'm sorry. You're typically not getting those micro tears. So for your typical stretching routine, where we're stretching again for 60 seconds per muscle group or whatever, we don't really have to recover. That's why we can stretch every day. Whereas when I tell you, I want you to work on your pectoral muscles, I don't want you to work your pectoral muscles every day because you actually get weaker. You need 48 to 72 hours to recover so you get stronger and do it again. So stretching you can do every day. Now, if you're doing extensive stretching, like if we're doing an hour of stretching every day per muscle group, well, then we're probably putting a lot of strain. But for the typical, 60 seconds to 120 seconds or even 3 minutes of stretching per muscle group, individuals can do that every day. But again, as I said, though, I would recommend that they do different things. Rolling, vibration, stretching, etc. But you can still stretch every day.
Yeah, this is very clear. Okay, David, and now changing the the topic, if we talk about normative range of motion in football, I think we have been talking sometimes in the past about establish which will be the optimal range of motion in football. We don't know exactly, but thinking in maybe the possibility to have which will be a normative range of motion in football in different ages and even sex. The first thing I would like to ask you about the test. What test do you consider essential that we should include to quantify your range of motion?
Well, again, like everything else, I would suggest that we have more than one test.
Yeah.
So flexibility is typically passive. So we could have a passive test for a range of motion just to check the full range of motion that an individual would have. But of course, during a football game, we almost never would go to a full range of motion. So I think if we would classify them, we need to measure the active range of motion first. And so we could do that by doing dynamic kicks, and then we can use what are called goniometers. You could strap this device onto the individual's leg and hip, and it will measure the change in range of motion as they kick forwards, backwards, side to side, abduction, adduction. Or we could use a video camera and then measure that range of motion afterwards. But I think the active dynamic range of motion is the most important, but still we should include measures of passive range of motion, because again, that could be related to injury incidents.
Okay. And once we have this test done, my next question is about the age. How is the evolution? Because we know that age obviously affect range of motion. So I would like to ask you about which are the effect of age in flexibility. How
Sure.
affect age?
We can't fight age completely, but we can slow aging down. So an example that I use in my class is that, I don't know if you've ever done this test. Have you ever pinched the skin on the back of your hand and then watched how fast it goes down?
Yeah.
When I do that with my students, they pinch it, they can't even see it go down. It goes down so fast. Like they can't even measure it. It's like 100 milliseconds.
Yeah.
I do that, and like 5 minutes later, it's still not down. I'm an old man. So why is that? Well, the same thing is happening to your muscles and your connective tissue. So you've got a number of different types of protein. You have what's called collagen, which is a very strong protein, and you need that because you need your muscles and tendons and ligaments to be strong. But you also have what's called elastin protein. And just like the name says, elastin is elastic. And that's why my old hands don't go back to normal for a long period of time, because as I age, the elastin has been damaged and replaced with collagen. Now that's part of aging. That's part of being out in the sun. The sun damages my skin, but sorry, the same thing happens to your muscles. But like I said, regular exercise, whether it's mobility and flexibility training, counterbalances age. Now, not completely, I can't stay 22 years old all my life. My body has changed, but I'm 67 years old, and my flexibility is as good or better than most of my undergraduate students, because I keep on working on my flexibility. Yeah. You take a look at Novak Djokovic, who's almost 40 years old, and he's doing the splits, so if you keep moving, then the typical graph that you see about flexibility going down, that downward trend is far slower in an individual who continues. So of course, if you're older, you have to pay more attention to your flexibility. Whereas when you're younger, so if I miss a few sessions or a week, it's no big deal. I'm young. But as you're older, you've got to stay on that to keep the protein synthesis higher than the protein catabolism, or the breakdown of protein.
I see clear, and in my experience, I see the players when they get older and their performance continue being high, they train more and more, they spend more and more time training flexibility, 100%. In this way, David, I will continue in the same topic, but now let's think about young players when they are in puberty, in adolescence, when they are 13, 14, 16, 17-year-old, this range of age, in this they are growing. We know very clear, and we see how they have to coordinate the new muscle length. They are enhancing, they are growing, and then you need to adapt. So they need to improve their coordination. What are your thinkings? What are your reflections about flexibility training for them?
Well, we probably take it for granted. Again, I sped into that myth in my last answer, and I said, well, young people can take a few days off, and that's true because they don't degrade as fast as older people.
Yeah.
But if you take a look at the average population of youth across the world, especially the Western world, they tend to lose their flexibility as they get into adolescence. Like 13 and 14-year-old kids are losing their flexibility. So although they can adapt faster, if they don't do their flexibility, they will lose their flexibility. So it's still important, even for a youth, an adolescent, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, they need to keep on working on their flexibility to maintain that, so that as they get older, it's not a major problem. It's just part of it's like having breakfast.
Yeah.
You know, every morning they have breakfast. Every day they should be doing a little bit of flexibility to maintain that.
Absolutely.
And again, throughout their life, that'll help to decrease their injuries and hopefully decrease resistance to movement.
Absolutely, because we are observing now in the last years more and more muscle injuries in young players. And the experiences that we are observing more in the last year than before. And maybe one of the reasons is, or maybe one of the tools we can implement more consistently is flexibility training.
Yeah. Now, one of the reasons why we get, let's say, muscle strains is that typically they happen at a longer range of motion. So if you pull your hamstring, it's probably when you're at the more extreme ranges of your motion.
Yeah.
What static stretching can do for you is that it provides greater force at longer lengths. So when you're most susceptible, so there's a concept known as the muscle force length relationship. At the optimal angle, I generate the most force in my muscle. If my muscle is extended, it generates the least force. That's because of things like these things called cross bridges. You get the most cross bridges here. You get fewer cross bridges when your muscle is lengthened. So then you're weaker. So if you're sprinting and now you're in a weakened state, that's where you're probably going to have a hamstring pull. But if I do chronic stretching, then I'm still strong here, but I'll also be stronger at longer ranges of motion, which will again help me to prevent those injuries. And of course, with a more flexible muscle, I'm more compliant and I can absorb outside forces better, again, to combat the possibility of injuries.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And David, in this way, I remember in Monterey Congress, we were talking about the Professor Keith Barr, about the research of the Professor
Great
Keith Barr.
presentation.
What's the link? Because you commented in an answer before also about the researching that you have done related with stretching and strength and hypertrophy. What's the link? What's your opinion about the link between eccentric training and flexibility training? What's your opinion about it?
Oh, that's a great point. So we published a review paper, and we showed in that review paper that resistance training can provide you with a similar increase in range of motion as stretching. So I've on and off been lifting weights for 50 years. And every time I'd go in, I'd always stretch before I did my resistance training. But what we found is that, of course, you still want to do a warm-up. You don't want to just jump in there and start doing, 200 kilogram squats. You need to warm up in terms of doing partial or doing range of motion with weights, etc. But resistance training on its own will increase your range of motion. And then some studies have shown that it's the eccentric component that provides you with the greatest signal or impetus for that increase in range of motion. So again, when it comes to injuries, we tend to have greater chance of injuries with eccentric contractions. And so when we combine resistance training and especially eccentric contractions, we'll get an increased range of motion, again, at longer lengths, and again, decrease in injury incidence. So the eccentric component is very, very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that in future, more and more research are going to be done in this topic. Yeah, absolutely. So David, let's think now in the last two questions that we are finishing our conversation. For me, it's David is giving a lot of valuable knowledge for everyone for practitioners, for everyone in research. That all of them, all of us related with performance in football, really love this content. But David, I would like to ask you first about your last FSI master lectures that you recorded. Could you tell us more or less in general what you talk about in your last lecture?
Well, actually, this last time we're at Monterey and we recorded a number of lectures. I think I recorded 5 different lectures.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I had, so of course, I think it was 2018. Was that when we did the first lectures?
Yeah.
So it was time for us to update that information. So one of our lectures is an update on what we call metastability, or training under unstable conditions.
Yeah.
And so I provide an update on the information on metastability resistance training. We also provided an update on the effect of stretching on performance, the effect of stretching on injury incidents, which we've talked about here, alternative methods for flexibility. So again, like we've talked about here, foam rolling and vibration and resistance training and other methods. Then we added a new one. The new video is on how to measure range of motion. And I talk a lot about the reliability of different measures and the validity of those measures. And again, we briefly talked about that here in this video.
Yeah, fantastic. I know, I remember very well. And David, last question is out of football. I would like to know that people could know about which is your favorite sport and how this sport practice provided for your daily work.
Well, when I was a youngster, my 3 major sports were, of course, I'm a Canadian, so I played ice hockey. You got to play ice hockey. And I played baseball and I played Canadian or North American football. So when I was drafted as an American football player, I only lasted 1 month. I made like $150 and that was my big career. So I had to move on to something else. So I moved on to tennis and squash. And of course, I continued weight training and I started doing distance running, 5K, 10K. I've run 5 marathons. So these days, I mostly play tennis and hockey. And so, again, as an aging individual, I have to admit, the important thing is that we do not accept what people tell us is that as you get old, you get slow. Why do you get slow when you get old? Well, again, you are aging, so things do change. But one of the major reasons you get slow is because people tell you that you have to slow down. Stop playing singles tennis, you should be playing doubles tennis. Or take up golf. You only have to walk when you play golf. You don't have to run. The important thing for people as they age is they combat this by doing explosive movements. So I barely ever play doubles because for the most part, you just stand there.
Yeah.
But in singles, I have to sprint. In ice hockey, I have to sprint. And by sprinting, again, like I said, we teach the nervous system how to operate optimally. I'm not as fast as I was 50 years ago, but I still can explode relatively because my brain is sending down high frequency signals because twice a week I play hockey, 3 times a week I play tennis, and I am trying to maintain some aspect of velocity and explosiveness in this old body. And so that inspires me in my research as well, because I go into a weight room and 20 years ago I saw people working on exercise balls or on Bosu balls, and I asked, does it work? And I did like 15 years of research on that.
Right.
And then I see people using rotor massagers or vibration guns. And then I go, does it work? And so I've done decades of work on that. So it keeps on. Personally, it allows me to keep on playing my sports and be functional in my daily activities of daily life. And it inspires me upstairs as well for my research.
Absolutely agree, and a fantastic answer. So David, it time has fly, really. It's has been a pleasure to have you here, to listen you. I think, like I said before, you have given us a huge knowledge, a huge experience, and it has been a pleasure to have you here. So thanks a lot.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome to FSI Talks, where football experts from around the world share practical and updated knowledge with the FSI community.